And not one of those persons engaged in that debate will disagree if you tell them that the entire debate is moot. Because after all, the whole thing is just sunnah, isn't it? So yeah. And that each will get rewarded accordingly, isn't it? And you say, yeah. But we simply want to point out that we are more authentic. We are closer to the sunnah. We are closer to the sunnah. If you take that particular debate out of context, it's almost mindless. But if you look at this as a context, as a national effort, not simply to practice Islam, not just to practice Islam, but to practice Islam authentically. To practice Islam authentically, even in such a, comparatively speaking, I'm not disparaging or minimizing the importance of Taraweeh, but comparatively speaking, this is a very small issue. But the heat it generates, and if you're Pakistani, you know what I'm talking about. They have masjids with signs on it. 8 rakah, 20 rakah. I mean, I'm not saying every masjid has a sign on it. And it might well be from the sources that have enlightened me, probably just 2 or 3. But ultimately, this particular issue raises so much heat that you have to separate the warring parties. You go left and you go right. In India, there is no effort to look at a Muslim or a group that is even historically considered of questionable faith and to label them non-Muslim. In Pakistan, it has become a knee-jerk response. Takfir is the name of the game. These very Shia who've been living amongst us since the beginnings of Islam, who've been living amongst us for hundreds, if not thousands of years, are now suddenly kafir. Are now suddenly kafir. They are just kafir. And the ease with which people bandy these terms, the ease with which people bandy these terms. Ulama bandy these terms. And you say, you ought to know better. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was just so careful about this and so afraid of it. He went on to say, Man kafar al-Muslim, faqad kafar. That if you call someone a kafir, then certainly one of you is a kafir. If one Muslim calls another Muslim a kafir, then one of you is kafir. Because you obviously you have a list of this is what I believe in and this is what I believe in. You say, well, it doesn't correlate, so you're not Muslim. And even amongst, and I was, as a student, that was my experience. I had the good fortune of spending time with a person called Bin Baz. And I used to sit in his, when he used to be asked questions. And he was so diplomatic in the way he would answer this question. And he is from the Wahhabi sect or group. And he says, whoever does that, then the actions that he's engaging in, or the practices that he's engaging in, or the belief that he espouses, that is the belief of people who are outside Islam. He would not call that person a non-Muslim. He would not call that person a kafir. So my purpose for sharing that with you is, and you know, you're more familiar with this than I am, that ultimately this is undergirded by a mindset. And that is the mindset to forge ahead and lay claim to authentic Islam. Authentic Islam. All of these, and these debates are hot. They all have, even people who are otherwise engaged in very important conversations. And it's very distressing for a person in my position from the outside to listen to them speak that way. Because I have the highest regard for their primary concerns. So you take a person who used to be a frequent guest to IAGD, Dr. Isar Ahmed. And certainly, you know, he had a very lofty agenda. His life revolved around interpreting and applying the Quran. But lo and behold, he also got involved in the Taraweeh controversy. Also gets involved in the Khat. You get dragged down. You get dragged down. Another very prominent Pakistani, a very deep thinker, Ghamidi, gets involved in all of these conversations. It's like you cannot but get involved in the conversation. And these are symptomatic of the kind of demographics that you have. Wherever, so you know, to round this off, wherever Muslims are in the majority, pluralism is not something that they would gravitate towards. Wherever Muslims are in the majority, pluralism is not something they would gravitate towards. Their majoritarian position itself empowers them. It gives them a position of authority. And pluralism therefore requires that you give equal time and equal space to minorities. That's what happens. Wherever Muslims are a minority, secularism is almost an article of faith. Because their future, their well-being depends on it. Their future and their well-being depends on it. And if you do speak out in defense of pluralism, then you do so at your peril. You do so at your peril. There's a member of the Jamaat al-Tabligh who is a very prominent alim, and we also had the good fortune of having him here at IAGD more than once, I think, Tariq Jamil. And recently he's been speaking about the need to look beyond the trivialities of our faith, this race towards authenticity. And he was gutsy enough to go into a Gurdwara and give this talk and speak to the brothers next to him, the Shia, as these are our Muslim brothers. That's a very courageous statement to make. I just turn on the news or go through my computer to see the headline, Tariq Jamil has been assassinated. Because that is almost like the logical conclusion to anyone who speaks in that way. To anyone who speaks in that way. We had this actor who also happened to be here some time ago, who died in this tragic airplane accident. A slip of the tongue said something about Aisha radiallahu anha. And people were baying for his blood. Musician. Junaid Jamshed, that's right. Baying for his blood. Even though he made tawbah 101 times. Not good enough. Just not good enough. It is not that Pakistanis are intolerant. It is because they seek this kind of authenticity. They can only validate their position by pursuing this authenticity. It's not just Islam, it has to be a particular kind of Islam. It's not just Sunni Islam, it has to be a particular kind of Sunni Islam. You cannot just be a follower of the Prophet ﷺ. You have to follow him in a particular way. So how we get past that, I don't have the answer to that. I cannot give you the answer as to how you get past that. And the dangers of that are clear to you. But there are equal dangers on this side. I mean, I don't think too many of us would want to have kids or grandkids running around with names like Abraham. See? But that's what happens if you marry someone who is non-Muslim and bring her in. This kind of accommodation and pluralism does not stop at the door. It actually gets right into your bedroom. It shares space with you. You can't simply have a nice mural there of Allah. You have to have Ganesh next to him. Ganesh has to be right next to him. So living this minority status comes with its own price. And we as Muslims in America, I mean, if you have Pakistani origins and links, then obviously you have a concern for Pakistan. But your future is dependent on this part of the world. So you have to be very conscious about the challenge of a pluralistic society. Some of the founding members of the MSA who went on to establish ISNA and who are very highly regarded in the Muslim community. Their daughters we know their daughters, and educated daughters, marrying outside the faith. There are multiple reasons for that. And certainly there might even be a fatwa that supports that. My point is not to condemn or condone the practice. It's simply to say that when you live this kind of life that is accommodating, accommodation does not have any borders. It doesn't have a point of stoppage. But you have to find an alternative that is meaningful, wholesome, and not an impediment to your life in this country. If we were living 25 years ago, or 30 years ago, without the events that have transpired, and so many cataclysmic events have transpired in the past 2 or 3 decades, then perhaps our future would be different. But we're today caught at the crossroads. If we go isolationist, there's a price to pay. And if you integrate, then you might be proud of a child who is the editor of one of America's leading magazines and very concerned that all of his kids are probably non-Muslim, and that he is not just a good political scientist, but he's also a wine critic, Fareed Zakaria. So this is the future we're looking forward to. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. If you have any questions, you can ask. Yeah.
Why do you think that after 1924 there was not a reasonable or a legitimate claim to the caliphate that was accepted? And second of all, how can we live as minoritarians physically while being deluded into thinking we're majoritarians with the mindset here?
The first question is a macroscopic question because it's asked, I mean, if you're asking this to just prompt a conversation, it's one thing, but if not, then we are reading. One of the problems we have as human beings is trying to read the past by taking our glasses off. Because every human being lives in a particular time frame, and that time frame is also his lenses through which he looks at the past. So you take for granted that, at the time of, I wonder how many people have this idea, that at the time of the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, mashallah, they had really good madrasas. All the kids used to come to the madrasa, and the madrasa used to open at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there used to be one hafiz, sahabi, and there's nothing like that. And for the longest time that, Muslims had a great educational system, they had elementary school, middle school, high school, nothing like that. But that's because we read our structures into the past. So in 1924, we're reading communication avenues, telephones, and so on, and rapid communication. Nothing like that. Think about this. Two people independently established two global movements, never met each other, and to the best of our knowledge, had no idea what the other was saying. But they ultimately ended up with two movements that were mirror images of each other. One was in Pakistan, Maududi, and the other was in Egypt, Hassan al-Banna. So when you look at Mass and ICNA having those conferences of theirs, this is that mirror image that came out of that period of Muslim history, where people were worrying about, now that the roof has flown away, what do we replace it with? So you had all of these competing groups out there. You had the secularists, who were graduates from universities in the West, who believed that you have to have a secular dispensation, you'd have a state and a nation, and this whole, think about people think about Zulfiqar Ali Bhutto. Think about the founder of Pakistan, excellent example. Excellent example. Pakistanis are eternally indebted to him for his contributions towards making Pakistan independent. Jinnah. And yet, he had no real interest in at least following Maududi's Dawah program. That was not his business. He was not in that business. So at that time, and the primary reason for not wanting, or having some reluctance towards having the Khilafah come back, because of its authoritative nature. It's fascinating that until Baghdadi came up now and stood on the mimbar in Raqqa, right? That's where he stood up. The last Khalifa that we just lost. You know what I'm talking about, right? ISIS. Even Al-Qaeda did not pursue the idea of a Khalifa. Banna didn't pursue the idea of a Khalifa. Maududi didn't pursue the idea of a Khalifa. The Jamaat al-Tabligh does not pursue the idea of a Khalifa. Nobody wants to go for the idea of the Khalifa because it takes away your autonomy. It forces you to bind yourself to an individual. It is about as autocratic as you can get. If you establish a Khalifa, all bets are off. His word is the final word. And we've become too accustomed to the idea of a consultative political structure for us to want to go back there. So we say, no, Islamically you cannot disavow the idea of Khilafah. It's embedded in our faith. We simply want to kick the can down the road. So it's not going to happen now. It will come at its own time. The success of ISIL is that it just turned time around. Muslims were waiting too long. ISIL simply said, the time has come and I'm the person and you will pay allegiance to me. How else do you explain the rapid response to the call? Educated, and most of the people who came from the West. Because this is what they wanted. That great man on a great white horse with a great white turban and a flowing beard, leading people towards ultimate salvation. Yes, the second part of your question?
Yeah, how do you, how can Muslims who are minoritarian reconcile with the fact that so many of them are deluded into thinking they're majoritarian, that they want to be looking for that authenticity in a place that almost demands pluralism? Is that not?
It's a very difficult thing to do. It's a very difficult thing to do. But the one thing I have to tell you that is undeniable, and it's also an integral part of your faith, the idea of the Ummah. The idea of the Ummah is central to Muslim communal thought. The structure of the Ummah and its operation in the future will depend on how you bring that about. So we have always believed in and supported, if not in practice, then at least in theory, the idea that this is in هَذِهِ أُمَّتُكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدًا, that this community of yours is one community. But how you actionalize it, how you make it operate. Do you actually look for space? And do you set up a capital? Or given the virtuality of the life that we live right now, where everything is virtual and surreal, do we accept a virtual ummah? And for the most part, when I look at myself and I look at the people around me, we're doing that. We're living in this country and we're living in other countries, but our priorities are all seem to be the same. We're just working on the mechanisms to facilitate both loyalty to the countries in which we belong, but also connection to the community to which we belong. The details of that kind of thought, they take a while. But it's one of the most powerful communal tools you have as a Muslim community. And if you allow it to just deteriorate and wither away, you've lost a very powerful tool. Other communities have adopted that idea. Christianity has a church. There's a church that is a building, and then you have a church which is the community. But it doesn't quite have the same impulse. Hinduism doesn't have the same impulse. Now they are starting to have that. And a lot of that is based on appropriation. You have that. You're required to believe in that. You're expected to practice it. How you practice that? In a meaningful way. That is not detrimental to the countries in which you live. That is of value to the communities in which you live. That which is of value to the community, the Muslim community at large. That is something that you have to work out. And inshallah you will do it for as long as you understand and keep at the back of your mind the need to keep it alive.
Great question. Growing up in the West, I have a problem of imagizing what the Ummah is. When was it? I mean, because I don't see it. You know, when you've got Iran and Iraq fighting, where's the Ummah there? You know, and even within our communities, we fight constantly. There's so much division. So I don't know when the Ummah went away, you know, because it looks like it's not there for me. You know, I see the individual relationships, but I don't see what you call the Ummah, you know. So.
Well, you know, I think you echo the disappointment of Muslims all over the world, as well as Muslims in Muslim history. I don't know if this is going to be some kind of comfort to you, or if it's going to further your discomfort. But the situation that you and I find ourselves in right now is no different from the situation that existed as soon as Rasulullah ﷺ left the world. As soon as he left the world, and the day after, and the week after, and the month after, and the decade after, and 20 years after, and 100 years after, and 1,000 years after. And it has little to do with our bad intentions. It has little to do with our not following Islam. It has to do with the fact, and this is something that even non-Muslim scholars speak about. Part of the reason that Muslims do not, or Islamic communities portray a sense of greater turbulence than other communities is because of the very things you and I want to celebrate, our diversity. Diversity comes at a price. Diversity comes at a price. It takes a while before you can adjust to a community. So here you are, a religion that's bringing people into Islam in droves, and they're coming with their baggage, they're coming with their language, they're coming with their culture, and they live with you. And you have to spend years, if not decades, negotiating that. And every time you reach some kind of a modus vivendi, you know, where you say, all right, let's just get along, something comes and upsets that. But the remarkable thing is, I mean, especially if you're interested in this, read people like Ibn Battuta. He's a great scholar. who traveled the Islamic world at the time. And he didn't write about the Ummah, but he spoke about the community. And you see Islam and that community flowing all the way from North Africa, through Europe, into what is now the Middle East. He goes to China, he comes to India. This is hundreds of years ago. So this is a 14th century old religion. And history has a tendency to simply highlight, it's like newspapers today. The best thing that could happen to a newspaper is for someone to get killed, someone to get assassinated, some house to burn down. Because if that doesn't happen, newspapers are not going to sell. History is just looking at news, but in a reflective manner and somewhat cleaned out. So therefore, when you look at that, it leaves you with, I mean, if you've studied the life of the Prophet ﷺ, notice that, your first one class would be about the Battle of Badr. And the next class would be the Battle of Uhud. And the one after that, the Battle of Khandaq. I mean, even out the chapter heading of the books that we consider holy, they're also marked by these events. That kind of gives you the impression that, these people did nothing but kill each other. Unless you stop and says, well, no, the one takes place in the 2nd year of Hijrah, the other takes place in the 5th year of Hijrah. So you had 3 years in which there was no battle going on. So given the nature of this community, it is not a homogeneous community. It's a racially, ethnically heterogeneous community. We love the African American brothers, and they love us as brothers in abstraction. Two qualifications we have to add. As brothers in abstraction, that as long as we're thinking about you and we see you from afar, you're great. But as soon as you come to the masjid and we get involved in the conversation, and before you know it, the barriers go up. I mean, when I teach these classes, it invariably ends up with this issue of, well, what goes on in a Desi mosque, an Arab mosque, and an African American mosque. All our efforts to come to terms with each other. But the love that you people have for Islam is astounding. The love that African Americans have for Islam is astounding. The commitment that you have for Islam is astounding. I can see it. I'm not listening to you bickering about how badly you're treated in a mosque. I'm looking at your commitment to the faith and the effort you're making to bridge that chasm. So you have to take a moment to look at your accomplishments in this country and elsewhere. Pakistan has suffered badly. Why? Because of Ummah. Take away this 5 million or 3 million Afghanis from Pakistan and quite a bit of your problems are solved. You have a huge drug problem in Pakistan. And according to some sources, this is because of what came from the north. Because of what came from the north. And your reasons for inviting them into Pakistan are Muslim brothers. I mean, the intent was just noble. And now you're sitting with a problem that is not just confined to that community, it's just blown out of proportion. It's just multiplied, absolutely. All based on the idea of that this is an ummah, we have an obligation, they should come in. So, this idea of us being a community in which everyone is welcome is a powerful idea. But getting those people who have come into the community to socialize, to acculturate, to become part of a single community, and taking the steps we have to take to meet them halfway, taking the necessary steps that we have to take to meet them halfway, also a challenge for us. Ultimately, Allah does not reward you for your accomplishments. Allah always rewards you for your efforts. Allah will always reward us for our efforts. There are Anbiya who stand up on the day of Hashar, on the day of Qiyamah, and some of them would have not a single follower. not a single follower. And on the basis of accomplishments, they didn't do very well. But that's not how Allah rewards you. So you have to اعملوا فسيرى الله أعمالكم. You have to do what is required with a deeper understanding of your faith. It's very important for you to really understand your faith. Understand the community to which you belong. You have enough time to do that. But you have to really make an effort to do that. And inshallah, we will grow from strength to strength. I just see ourselves, I mean, if you look at ourselves 30, 40 years ago in this country and where we are today, despite all our setbacks, our accomplishments are noteworthy. I'm not saying that. Believe me, I'm not saying that. Our neighbors are saying that. Part of the pushback that you're experiencing, is symptomatic of the awareness outside that these people are getting too close to power, that they understand the workings of this country very well. They should be put in their place. Thank you very much. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.
Still have 20 minutes.